How does one acquire faith? Well, this sounds like a simple question, doesn't it? But I actually find it a difficult question to answer, at least for myself, because it's a question that I feel in some ways I've never really had to struggle with. Because you see, my journey to faith has been pretty simple and straightforward. You know, when I think about it, I guess I would describe it in this way. I think that I was loved into faith by my family, of course, but also by the small, close knit rural church that I was baptized into when I was just a few months old, possibly only a few weeks old, and was part of until at the ripe old age of 24. I was ordained and sent off to Northern Alberta as a newly minted United Church minister, still wet behind the ears with a lot to learn, but filled with energy and optimism and hope. And while there are a lot of things about my early religious upbringing in a relatively conservative rural United Church that I have long since quite gladly and intentionally left behind, there are many other things about my early Christian experience that I value and cherish to this day. The importance of community, the beauty and art of simplicity, and the profound gift of a strong faith in a loving God. Now, I know that it all sounds kind of old fashioned now, but I think some of you, like me, will remember how we used to have to memorize Bible verses in Sunday school. And if I remember correctly, we sometimes even got prizes for it. And I wasn't then, and I'm still not a very good memorizer. So a lot of what I did manage to memorize in those days has long since vanished in the mists of time. But I do remember several verses, possibly because they're important to me. See if these sound familiar to you. John 3:16, probably the most memorized verse in the Bible. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And notice how I flip right into the King James Version of the Bible when I remember that. And what about the shortest verse in the Bible? Jesus wept. If there was a prize, you would get it, but there's not. And what was probably the first Bible verse that I ever memorized, and it's from our scripture reading from this morning, which Anne read for us. God is love. You know, I heard that verse and repeated those words so many times as a child that I think that I internalized them completely. And I say that because while there is almost no religious belief or teaching that I have not since questioned or doubted it enough to have received faith as a gift, an accident of birth almost, or an intentional act of nurture on the part of my parents, but a gift nevertheless. But faith can also be seen as a choice where ultimate questions, big questions of faith and life, are examined and addressed. Is there a God? What's the purpose of life? Does human life, does my life have any real meaning and purpose apart from simply surviving? Is human life basically good or basically evil? And where did I leave the car keys? Just checking. Some of us, like me, grew up in an environment where these choices were made quite early in our lives and largely not even consciously. In our experience, it feels as though we have always had faith. But other people and people I know and respect have had much more dramatic experiences of the divine. We sometimes call them conversions or rebirth or transformations, either sudden or gradual, but overwhelming experiences of the presence of the holy in their lives. Experiences that have convinced them of the existence of the divine. Well, I believe that however we come to faith, whether it's a gift or a choice, however we come to faith, the choices we make about these ultimate questions of life and faith will shape all of our choices in life. For example, from a kind of a theological point of view, if we believe that we human beings are born in sin, this doctrine is called original sin, and it's never been a part of Protestant theology, but has somehow crept into our religious culture. If that's our starting place, if that's our worldview, that we're born in sin, then how does that affect the way we live our lives? How does that affect the way we make choices in life and relate to other people? Well, if we believe that we are born in sin, then human beings are basically evil, aren't we? All of us. Not to be trusted. And our bodies are bad. Sexuality is dirty. We are fallen, sinful creatures in need of conversion and redemption. And what we need more than anything else is to be saved. But on the other hand, if we believe that we are created in the image of God, if we believe that we are pronounced good by God, and this is called creation spirituality or original blessing, if that's our starting place, then how does that affect the way we live our lives? Well, in this case, if we believe that we're created in the image of God, then human life is seen as precious. Human life, every human life contains the spark of the divine. Our bodies are good. Sexuality is a gift. All people are unconditionally loved by God and deserve to be loved unconditionally by other people. In this way of thinking, we are precious, treasured, loved children of God. And so you can see that it's a whole different mindset, a whole different worldview. I remember a story, and it's a true story that I've probably shared with you before, but it's appropriate now. And it's a story that answers the same question in a slightly different way. And it's a story about a minister who was a member of a presbytery in those days. Now it would be region, education and students committee. And the job of that education and students committee was to interview potential candidates who were being presented and considered for ministry. And this man would begin by instructing each of the candidates. He would say, I want you to look out that window. Look at that busy street with hundreds of people coming and going and passing by every day. And I want you to tell me, I want you to describe for me what you see when you look out that window. And it was his experience that students' responses were generally speaking, and significantly divided into two categories. There were those who would say something like, when I look out the window at all those people, I see lost, sinful souls, people who need to be saved. And then there were others who would say something like, when I look out that window, I see children of God who need to be loved. Well, I don't know about you, but I know which of those two I would want to be my minister. And so at its core, it comes down to a pretty simple question, a choice. What kind of person do I want to be? What kind of church do I want to belong to? What kind of community do I want to live in? And what kind of world do I want to leave behind for my children and my grandchildren? And we can make that choice. Do we want to be narrow and judgmental and mean-spirited and angry all the time? Or do we want to be generous and gracious and open and tender-hearted? Is ours a theology based on fear or a theology based on love? Well, in my own life, I know that if I choose to believe, and it is a choice, that the universe is basically hostile and evil, then I can see human suffering. I can see poverty and hunger and sickness all around me, and racism and homophobia and transphobia. And I can just walk by and shrug it off by saying, well, that's just the way life is, isn't it? The world is an evil, awful, sinful place, full of evil, sinful people. So what do you expect? But if I make a different choice, if I choose to believe that the universe is basically good, that we are lovingly created in God's image and likeness, then when I encounter evil in the world, all of those things I just mentioned, poverty and violence and racism and all of those things, when I confront those things in the world, I'm compelled to notice and say, there's something wrong with this. This is not God's intention for the world God created and nurtured in love. And it has to stop. And it has to stop now. And then I need to ask myself the question, what can I do to change this? Up to this point, I've been talking about very personal and individual choices that we get to make in life. But just as our individual and personal choices determine who we are and how we want to live our lives, so do the choices we make as an institution, as a faith community, for example, as the church. So do those choices determine who we are and how we live our collective life as a community. And this is an important question to consider because spirituality, at least certainly in the Christian tradition, is about community. It's about relationships. It's about connectedness. It's about our relationship with the holy, the divine, the sacred, however you experience and describe and name that for yourself. But it's also about our relationship with one another and with all of creation. I believe that God calls the church away from what is safe and predictable and secure toward a radical inclusiveness, a radical hospitality that is much more consistent with the gospel of Jesus Christ. You know, the one who associated with outcasts and sinners, with prostitutes and beggars, and consistently condemned the pious and self-righteous. As a denomination, the United Church of Canada has made some of those significant choices as to the kind of church we want to be. And in some cases, we've paid a very heavy price for that choice, with congregations splitting and people leaving the church. The 1936 decision to ordain women, the 1988 decision around the ordination of LGBTQ plus people, our support in 2003 for equal marriage in Canada, positive and supportive statements in 2009 and 11 about the inclusion of transgender folk in all areas of the church's life. Those are choices we've made as a national church, but as a congregation, I know that this congregation at Cummer Avenue United Church has also made some of those same choices that I'm talking about, asking the question, what kind of church do we want to be? And the answer, an inclusive faith community, an affirming ministry where all are welcome, regardless of gender, orientation, ability, background, and belief. But it all starts with us as individuals, people like you and me. It all starts with the choices we make individually about the kind of people we want to be, the kind of church we want to belong to, and the kind of community and world we want to create. I'm convinced that what we choose to believe does make a difference in how we act toward other people, in how we live our lives every day, both as individuals and as a church. I believe in the words of the creation myth in Genesis, that we are created in the image and likeness of God, and that we are loved and that we are declared good. I believe in the words of the prophet Isaiah, I have called you by your name, you are mine. I believe in the words of the psalmist that God formed our inward parts and fashioned us in our mother's womb, and that we are fearfully, wonderfully made. And I believe in the words of the first letter of John, which we heard this morning, that God is love, and that in love there is no fear. A 1991 issue of Christian Century, a periodical that I've been reading for years, ran an article written by a man by the name of William Carroll. And the article was called God as Unloving Father. And in that article, he described his experience of coming out as a gay man after 21 years of ministry and 23 years of marriage. And he describes his sense of isolation and his anger, but also his excitement and his hope. And I wish I had written this, but I didn't write it, but I could have, because this is exactly my story as well. He ends his article with these words, with which, to your great relief, I will end this sermon. He wrote, and now I am rebuilding a damaged faith in God. I have discovered that conversion doesn't mean rejecting myself, but means accepting myself as God created me. The greatest sin in my life, the point of my greatest alienation from God, was trying to be something I was not and could not be. I believe that God's grace has allowed me to look in the mirror and to love myself for the first time in my life. I'm starting off on a new journey, and